standing on end. And when those bottles are at 5 bar, it's like a solid block. It's as hard as a rock. Absolutely amazing. So I think quite an elegant solution to turning something weak into something strong, using air structurally to give it internal pressure. And what that meant was that we could start to pack these things together in geometrical forms and then package them up with complementary structural members similar to that Japanese egg carrier. And this was one of the first schemes that we came up with. So all of these elements would be made out of bundles of bottles packed together. At this stage it was a trimaran. And we looked at the possibility of actually showcasing new forms of propulsion. These kite sails are now being used for commercial shipping. They're just coming in. And it's a very promising way of radically reducing the amount of fossil fuel used in shipping transportation. The scheme went through various forms. At this stage it was looking a bit like a sort of pond skater, and still the same principle of bundles of plastic bottles. And at this stage we had a metal frame which held it together very rigidly. We then started exploring the possibility of it being a purer bottle boat. So rather than using too much metal, we were keen to try and find a way of packaging these bottles together with a material that was made from the same substance. So a sheet material made from recycled plastic bottles. And we discovered a material that's called SR PET. It's only just been developed, and it's looking like a very promising alternative to fiberglass. What it uses is waste plastic, post-consumer waste from plastic bottles, and it turns it into two forms. One is a fiber and the other is a resin. So it's a direct comparison with fiberglass. But the great thing about it is that at a chemical level, it's all one material. So it's very easy to recycle the whole thing. And then it turned into this, where we're getting the plastic bottles fitted around this sort of armature, this skeleton made up from the SR PET, so that you get a very clear sense of the skeleton within, a bit like this sort of transparent fish. So the bottles will be very, very visible. They're contributing not just buoyancy, but also they're stiffening the overall structure. So the design of the boat was one thing. The systems were another important element. David and I talked at great length about this, and we concluded that if this was to really be highlighting solutions, then what it would need to do is demonstrate that it's possible to create a boat that is not just zero carbon, but zero waste in the way it operates as well. So there were all sorts of ideas for how we could generate energy on the boat. We could use a wind turbine, we could use photovoltaic cells, and you can probably see on that model that there are even a pair of exercise bikes on the back, so that if the battery level drops down because there hasn't been enough wind or enough sun, then the crew can get on those exercise bikes and work some of that flat off. And the same goes for the water and the waste systems. We looked at the possibility, once again taking our inspiration from biomimicry, looking at a number of examples of organisms that can harvest their own harvest their own water in a desert environment. And I'll be saying more about one of those, called the Namibian fog-basking beetle, in the second half of my talk. So harvesting water for the crew, and also dealing with all the waste. So the solid waste would go to a biodigester, and that would be just biodigested and carried forward to the next port. So absolutely nothing would be emitted to the oceans. And you might wonder why we felt it was necessary to be so sort of hard line about human waste. After all, it's just biological waste. Well, the reason for that is that at the moment, a lot of shipping actually creates an appalling example. A lot of the big cruise liners, as soon as they get out into international waters, they just open up their tanks and discharge all this raw sewage straight into the sea. So we felt that if we could make a boat at this scale work in a completely closed-loop way, then it would send out a very powerful message to the rest of the shipping industry. If we can do it at this scale, there's no reason why they wouldn't be able to do it at a bigger scale. So this is where the project is at now. It's just about to start its sea trials. It's being built in San Francisco. It's all looking extremely exciting. That's how the scheme will look when it's completed, and it's going to set sail next year. And just to say a little bit about the legacy for this, the intention is that at the end of the voyage, the whole boat can be dismantled. A lot of people thought it would be better to actually keep it intact and put it on tour, but David was very keen that it should be an exemplar of closed-loop design, cradle-to-cradle design. So it's been designed in a way that allows all those bottles to not just be recycled, but actually upcycled, turned into a product that's more valuable than the original one. So at the end of the voyage, there's a very good chance that those materials, the bottles and the SR PET, could be turned not back into bottles, but into Patagonia fleeces, and then auctioned to raise money for the Adventure Ecology Foundation. We also thought about what could happen with the systems and the bits of equipment. So some of the bits of equipment, the masts and the sails, they're pretty valuable, that they could just be reused. Other bits, like the photovoltaic panels, they could be given away to parts of the developing world where they can continue to have a life and really make a difference. So to just sum up some of the things that I think the Plastiki expedition has achieved, one of the really big things it's achieved is that it's helped develop this material called SR PET, which is a very good replacement for fiberglass. It's completely recyclable. The boat is also made out of a number of other innovations. So rather than using resin, David and his team have developed an alternative adhesive made entirely from natural constituents using cashew nut glue. The sails, that's another first. Those sails are also made out of post-consumer waste, and that's the first time that an ocean-going vessel has been equipped with sails from completely recycled materials. So I'm very optimistic that this scheme is going to attract a lot of attention. I'm hopeful that it's going to actually transform the way we look at the design of boats, and also to really stimulate an intelligent debate about the best way to use plastics, and about which types of plastics perhaps we should stop using, and which types of new plastics we need to develop so that we can really fulfill this idea of plastics being a cradle-to-cradle material. So now I'm going to talk about the Sahara Forest Project. And to set the context for this one, I'm going to describe something that happened in the Sahara Desert fairly recently. In 70 BC, Caesar decided that North Africa would be a good place to supply Rome with grain, having exhausted the fertility of the fields in Italy. So he invaded North Africa, his armies set about clearing the land, and at the time it was actually a wooded landscape. And the Roman writer Pliny marveled at the extent of the cypress and cedar forests, the abundance of fruits in the forest, and the variety of animals that existed. It's hard to think of now, but when I said recent, I wasn't being facetious. That is actually a very short time ago in geological terms. It's only 2,000 years ago. So the Romans set about clearing the land, turning it into intensive agriculture. A lot of the animals were captured and sent off to Rome. So just for the opening of the Colosseum in 30 BC, some 5,000 elephants, tigers, panthers and bears were transported to Rome for the opening party. Say what you like about the Romans, but they certainly knew how to throw a party. And over time, that intensive agriculture started to take its toll. And they noticed that the climate was changing and the fertility was dropping. It supplied Rome with grain for about 300 years, but in 250 AD, the Bishop of Carthage, St. Cyprian, remarked that the earth has grown old and does not remain in its former vigor. It bears testament to its own decline. Springs that once gushed forth now produce only a trickle of water. Rainfall is diminishing and the climate is changing. So even in those times, there were examples of human-induced climate change. So that's another fairly powerful example of a very linear and extractive model of using resources. And this is another example of applying biomimicry. And to describe biomimicry in its simplest terms, I think you could say that really it's just about taking advantage of a source of ideas that has benefited from a 3.8 billion year R&D period. So nature is pretty good. It's had a long R&D